The little girl was blue. Not the vibrant, playful blue of a summer sky or the soft hue of a silk dress, but a frightening, washed-out blue, the color a body turns when it has been frozen for far too long. She lay curled inside a damp cardboard box behind the dumpster of Rosalie's diner, her small body shaking so violently that her teeth clattered together in hard little clicks, a sound Sophia Bennett would hear again in her nightmares for many years afterward. Sophia almost missed her. She had just finished a double shift, 16 hours on her feet, carrying heavy plates of pasta and thick-crust pizzas to customers who could not even be bothered to look at her tired face. Her back ached with a dull intensity, and her legs throbbed with every step. All she wanted was to go home, stand under a hot shower until the steam filled her lungs, and collapse into the sanctuary of her bed. She took the back door because it was faster, a shortcut through the shadows to the bus stop. Pushing through the heavy metal door and stepping out into the brutal February night of Charleston, that rattling sound made her stop. At first she thought it was a stray cat. The alley behind the diner was home to a few forgotten felines she sometimes fed with leftovers wrapped in napkins. But this was different. Not the cry of an animal seeking a meal. It was the weak, exhausted moan of something human. A sound so fragile, it nearly dissolved into the whistling wind. Sophia moved toward the dumpster, her worn sneakers grinding against the frozen, uneven ground. The lone street light at the end of the alley flickered, throwing just enough sickly yellow light for her to see the box. It was a refrigerator box, the kind you usually saw behind large appliance stores, and someone had shoved it tight against the cold brick wall of the building next door. She leaned over and peered inside. The little girl could not have been more than 5 years old. She wore a thin, tattered dress that might once have been a cheerful pink, but was now a dismal gray, with layers of dirt and ancient stains. No coat protected her, no shoes covered her tiny feet. She had only that filthy dress and a torn stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest. Her black curls were matted and tangled into a wild, hopeless mess. Her face was streaked with frozen tears and grime, but it was her eyes that truly broke Sophia's heart. Those warm brown eyes were wide, staring up at Sophia with a look that held both pure terror and a strange kind of weary surrender, as if she had already accepted that no one was coming to save her from the dark. "Oh, my God!" Sophia whispered, her breath hitching in the frigid air. She quickly took off her coat, the bright red wool picacoat her grandmother had given her before she died, and wrapped it around the trembling child. The little girl did not fight her. She did not speak. She only kept shaking her small body, going limp like a broken doll when Sophia lifted her out of the cardboard coffin. "It is okay, sweetheart," Sophia said, even though her own voice was shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "I have you now. You are safe." The little girl was so light, she felt almost weightless in Sophia's arms. Sophia could feel every rib through the thin fabric of the dress. How long had she been out here? How long had she been alone in the mouth of winter? Sophia looked around the alley, searching for any sign of the person who had left this child to freeze to death. But the alley was empty. The windows of the surrounding buildings were dark and indifferent. No one was watching. No one had seen the crime. Someone had thrown this little girl away like trash. If the child had been found only a few hours later, she would not have survived the night. What kind of monster abandoned a 5-year-old in the bone-deep cold of Charleston like this? Sophia had no idea that the trembling little girl in her arms was the missing daughter of a legend, the child of the vampire king who had turned the entire hidden world upside down for 5 years just to find her. Sophia did not go home the way she had planned. She could not leave this child to the cold machinery of the city until she knew the girl was warm. Instead, she carried the child 6 blocks toward her apartment, holding the little girl tight against her chest to share the last scraps of warmth left in her own weary body. The child did not say a single word the entire way. She did not cry or whimper. She only clung to Sophia's neck with small fingers gone stiff with cold and stared straight ahead with those haunted, ancient eyes. The building where Sophia lived was old and falling apart, a relic of a different era, but inside it was shielded from the wind. She climbed 4 flights of stairs, fumbling with her keys, while trying not to drop the precious burden. The door stuck the way it always did, and she had to kick it twice before it finally groaned open. Her apartment was tiny, just a single studio, with the bed in one corner and the kitchen in the other. But it was her sanctuary. The walls were painted a pale yellow, something she had done herself when she moved in 3 years ago, trying to bring a little artificial sunlight into a space that always smelled faintly of damp and old wood. A worn blue sofa she found at a thrift store sat against the wall, and a small wooden table with 2 chairs served as both a place to eat and a place to work, when she took extra sewing jobs to make ends meet. Sophia set the little girl down on the bed, then hurried to turn on the old space heater in the corner. The machine hummed to life, and warm air began to spread through the room. She turned back to the child. The little girl still sat perfectly still on the edge of the mattress, both arms wrapped tight around the torn, stuffed rabbit, like it was the only anchor she had left in a drifting world. Her large brown eyes tracked Sophia's every movement with the weary, guarded attention of a wild animal that had learned the hard lessons of human cruelty too well. She was still shaking. Her whole body trembled without stopping a rhythmic shudder that seemed to come from her very soul. Even though the room was already beginning to warm, Sophia understood it was not only the Charleston weather's cold that afflicted her. It was the cold that had seeped into bone and spirit, the cold of being utterly forgotten. Sophia sat down beside the bed, careful not to move too fast, not to frighten the small creature. She spoke very gently, her voice a soft melody. "I need to take this dirty dress off you, honey. Okay? I am going to find you something warmer and softer to wear." The little girl did not react with words. She only kept watching Sophia with those empty, searching eyes. Sophia slowly reached for the gray, filthy dress. When she gently lifted the stained cloth over the child's head, her breath caught in her throat, and a cold stone formed in her stomach. Under the thin fabric, the small body was covered in bruises. Some had faded to a sickly yellow, while some were still fresh, and a dark, angry purple. There were bruises on her arms, on her small back, and on her thin thighs. There were too many bruises for a 5-year-old. There was too much pain for such a tiny, fragile life. Sophia felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat, and she had to turn her face away for 1 second to hold herself together, not wanting the child to see her cry. When she looked back, her eyes caught on something strange and distinct. Behind the little girl's right ear, half hidden in the messy black hair, was a birthmark. It had a strange, perfect shape, like a small crescent moon, reddish-brown against skin that was still pale and translucent. Sophia had never seen a birthmark with such a clear, intentional shape. It did not look like an ordinary patch of skin. Its edges were sharp and unusually distinct, as if nature itself had perfectly etched the mark onto the girl's skin as a seal. Sophia gently brushed the tangled hair away from the child's face, her touch lighter than a feather. "Can you tell me your name, sweetheart?" No answer came. The little girl only hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter, her small fingers squeezing so hard her knuckles turned white. Sophia did not push her for answers. She stood and went to the small closet, finding an old t-shirt, the softest one she owned, a gentle shade of moss green. She pulled it over the little girl's head, and it fell past her knees, like a nightgown. At least now she had something clean and soft against her skin. Sophia looked down at the child, at the bruises, at the crescent birthmark, and at the brown eyes that had seen too much suffering for one lifetime, let alone 5 short years. Sophia did not know who this child was or what world she belonged to. She did not know what kind of monster had done this, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not let anyone hurt this little girl ever again, even if she had to fight the darkness itself. Sophia took the little girl into the bathroom. It was a small, cramped room with an old bathtub stained by time, but the water still ran hot and reliable. She turned the faucet slowly, testing the temperature with her elbow, the way her grandmother had taught her many years ago. Not too hot to scald, not too cold to chill, but just warm enough to drive away the frost that had sunk all the way into the child's marrow. The little girl stood motionless, watching Sophia prepare the bath, still clutching the torn stuffed rabbit tight against her chest. When Sophia gently helped her step into the tub, the girl drew in a sharp, hissing breath as the warm water touched her frozen skin. Then slowly, very slowly, the small body began to loosen its defensive posture. Her thin shoulders dropped. The fingers clenched around the stuffed rabbit relaxed just a fraction. Sophia used a soft cloth and gentle soap to wash the girl's skin, being incredibly careful to avoid the dark spots of the bruises. She did not dare scrub hard, afraid of causing any more pain to a body already burdened by it. Layer after layer of dirt and stains began to rinse away into the soapy water, revealing pale skin beneath that shimmered with a strange porcelain quality. As Sophia's hands worked, her mind drifted into the shadows of the past. She thought of her own grandmother, the woman who had raised her after Sophia's parents died in a sudden car accident. Sophia had been only 8 years old when the world turned gray. She remembered crying for night after night, and her grandmother holding her in arms that were thin and frail, but always warm. Her grandmother did not say much. She only held Sophia and let her cry until there were no tears left to shed. Then one night, when Sophia asked why she had taken her in, even though she was old and did not have much money, her grandmother smiled and said something Sophia never forgot. "Love is not something you receive, my child. Love is something you give. And when you give love, somehow you end up receiving more than what you gave." Sophia did not truly understand those words when she was small and hurting. But now, looking down at the child in the bathtub, she was beginning to see the wisdom in them. She did not have much to give. She was only a waitress with a miserable apartment and a bank account that was almost empty, living paycheck to paycheck in a city that felt indifferent to her existence. But she could give this child one warm night. She could give her safety, even if only for a little while, and maybe that was all either of them needed right now. After the bath, Sophia wrapped the little girl in the warmest, fluffiest towel she owned and carried her out to the main room. The girl's skin had a little more color now, no longer that frightening, washed-out blue of the alleyway. Sophia dressed her back in the soft green t-shirt and sat her on the bed, tucking another thick blanket around her small frame. Then she went into the tiny kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There was not much inside: a few eggs, some wilted vegetables, and a small container of chicken left over from the night before. Sophia took out the chicken and began to make a simple porridge. She added a little salt, a little onion, and let it simmer low on the stove until the savory smell filled the small room. When she brought the bowl to the little girl, those big brown eyes locked onto the food with a hunger she could not hide. The child ate slowly, spoon by spoon, as if she was afraid that if she ate too fast, someone would suddenly appear and snatch the bowl out of her hands. Sophia sat beside her and watched her heart tightening at the way this child treated food. This was how someone ate when they had been starved by both stomach and soul. This was how someone ate when they did not know when the next meal would ever come. After the little girl finished, Sophia cleaned up and prepared for sleep. She planned to curl up on the old sofa and give the bed to the child. But when she stood to leave, a small cold hand grabbed her sleeve. Sophia looked down. The little girl was staring up at her with pleading eyes, and for the first time Sophia saw real, raw fear there. Not the fear of being hit, but the fear of being abandoned again. Sophia understood. She climbed onto the bed and lay down beside the child, staying close enough that the girl would know she was still there. The little girl curled against Sophia, the stuffed rabbit wedged between them. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to sleep, even as her mind spun with 1,000 questions. Who are you? Who did this to you? Why were you abandoned in that alley? She did not know how much time passed before she heard a small sound, a whisper so quiet she almost missed it. Sophia opened her eyes slowly. In the dim darkness of the room, she saw the little girl talking to the stuffed rabbit. Bun Bun, will she leave us? She will leave us like the others, right? Sophia stayed still, pretending to sleep. But it felt like someone was squeezing her heart, until it bled. How many times had this child been cast aside to be this afraid? Sophia made a silent promise in the dark. She would not abandon her. No matter what happened, she would not let her be alone again. The dull gray light of a winter morning slipped through the gaps in the old curtains. When Sophia woke, she lay still for a moment, feeling the warmth of the small body curled beside her. The little girl was still asleep, her tiny fingers clenched around the stuffed rabbit, her face far more peaceful than it had been the night before. Sophia eased herself out of bed, careful not to wake the child. She needed a cup of coffee to clear her head and figure out the next step in this impossible situation. She had barely set her feet on the cold floor when she heard a sharp intake of breath behind her. Then a scream tore through the morning quiet. Sophia turned and saw the little girl sitting bolt upright in bed, brown eyes wide with terror. She scanned the room like a wild animal cornered in a trap, her breath coming in fast, panicked gasps. When her gaze could not immediately find Sophia, her whole body began to shake, and choking sobs burst from her throat. Sophia hurried back to the bed, her heart racing. "I am here, I am here. You are okay." Oh, she sat beside the child, not daring to touch her, yet afraid it would frighten her even more. But the little girl lunged toward her small arms, locking tight around Sophia's waist, as if she feared Sophia would vanish into thin air the moment she let go. And then, for the first time, the little girl spoke to her directly. "Do not go." Her voice was hoarse and trembling so faint Sophia had to lean in to catch the words. But it was a voice, real words, from a child who had been silent through the whole ordeal. "Do not go. Do not leave me." Sophia felt hot tears rise in her eyes. She wrapped her arms around the girl, this time holding her tight, letting her feel the solidity of her presence. "I will not leave you. I promise. I will stay here with you." They stayed that way for a long time until the girl's breathing slowly steadied and her trembling finally eased into a quiet rhythm. Sophia knew she needed help. She was not a doctor. She did not know how serious the bruises were or whether the child had internal injuries from the cold. She needed someone with training, and she knew exactly who to call. Maggie O'Brien lived in the apartment right next door, a 68-year-old widow with silver hair pinned neatly back and bright blue eyes that were still sharp despite her age. She had been a nurse for 40 years before retiring, and she had become the only family Sophia had left since her own grandmother passed away. Sophia carried the little girl to Maggie's apartment, and the child clung to her like a small koala, refusing to let go even for a second. When Maggie opened the door and saw them, her eyes widened in shock. Sophia quickly told her what had happened about the cardboard box, the bitter cold, and the abandoned child. Maggie did not ask many questions. She only nodded and opened the door wide to let them in. Maggie's apartment was warm and filled with decades of memories. The air held a faint, comforting scent of cinnamon and vanilla. The little girl looked around with curious eyes, pausing at the collection of ceramic angels on the windowsill. Maggie led them into the living room and began to examine the child. She worked gently and carefully, always speaking in a soothing melodic voice, so the girl would not be afraid. Sophia sat beside them, holding the child's hand through it all. When Maggie finished, she sat across from Sophia, her face grave and lined with concern. "She is severely malnourished," Maggie said, her voice lowering into a whisper. "From what I can see, she has not been properly fed for a very long time. Maybe months, maybe even years. Her ribs are sticking out, Sophia. She has almost no muscle." Sophia swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. "And the bruises, Maggie." Maggie was silent for a moment, her eyes reflecting a deep professional sadness. "Those are not bruises from falling or accidents." She looked Sophia straight in the eyes. "Those are bruises from being hit. She has been abused, Sophia. I do not know who did this, but this child has been living through a nightmare for a long time. You have to call the police, Sophia. You cannot keep her here without telling anyone. She has family somewhere. Someone is looking for her. Or if no one is looking, then you need to report it so they can find the monster who did this." Sophia looked down at the little girl sitting beside her. She was still holding Sophia's hand, those brown eyes following the conversation as if she understood the stakes. Sophia knew Maggie was right. She could not hide the child forever. She had to do the right thing, even if it meant letting her go. "All right," Sophia said at last. "I will call the police, but I will not leave her side. I will stay with her until I know she will be truly okay." The call to the police department took less than 5 minutes, but to Sophia it felt like an entire century. She sat in her small apartment, the little girl curled beside her, and she waited for the world to come crashing in. About an hour later, there was a resolute knock at the door. Sophia opened it and saw a middle-aged woman standing outside. She had black hair threaded with silver, pulled into a neat bun, sharp brown eyes that still carried an ember of warmth, and a sturdy posture that radiated the confidence of someone who had done this difficult work for a long time. She wore a dark brown leather jacket, and a silver badge was pinned to her chest. "I am Detective Tamsin," she said, her voice low and steady. "You are the one who called about an abandoned child." Sophia nodded and stepped aside to let her in. The moment Tamsin crossed the threshold, the little girl on the bed shrank back. She pulled the blanket up to cover half her face, leaving only those wide brown eyes staring at the stranger with guarded fear. The stuffed rabbit was squeezed so hard in her arms it almost bent out of shape. Tamsin saw the reaction immediately. She did not move closer. Instead, she lowered herself slowly into a chair at a distance from the bed, bringing herself down so she would not loom over the child. "Hello, sweetheart," Tamsin said gently. "My name is Tamsin. I am with the police. I am here to help you." The little girl did not answer. She only looked at Tamsin, then at Sophia, as if searching for permission to exist in this new reality. Sophia sat down beside her on the bed and took the small hand in hers. "It is okay, Mila," Sophia murmured, using the name she had heard the girl whisper. She is a good person. You can trust her. Sophia's presence seemed to steady the child just enough. She did not let go of Sophia's hand, but her eyes were not as wild with panic anymore. Tamsin watched the way they held to each other and gave a small, perceptive nod. She pulled out a small notebook and began to ask questions in a soft tone. Can you tell me your name? Silence stretched. Then a tiny voice spoke. Arabella. My name is Arabella. Tamsin wrote it down carefully. Arabella, do you remember where you lived before you were in that box? The little girl shook her head slowly. I do not remember. I only remember him. Him, Tamsin repeated. Who is he? Arabella began to tremble. Sophia squeezed her hand tighter, and that seemed to give her enough courage to continue. He wears a black leather jacket, she whispered. He says Arabella's dad is bad. He says nobody wants Arabella. He says, I am useless. Every word from the child landed like a knife in Sophia's chest, sparking a rage she had never felt before. Tamsin was quiet for a moment too. Her jaw clenched hard before she smoothed her face back into professionalism. Arabella, can I look at the birthmark behind your ear? Sophia told me about it. The girl hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Tamsin stood slowly moving with deliberate care so she would not frighten her. She sat on the edge of the bed and gently swept the messy black hair away from Arabella's right ear. The crescent-shaped birthmark showed clearly in the daylight. Tamsin stared at it, and her eyes suddenly widened with a shock she could not hide. She took out her phone and snapped several pictures, her hand trembling, in a way that was almost too small to notice. When she was done, Tamsin stood and guided Sophia to the corner of the room, speaking low, so the child would not hear. Normally, in a case like this, we would place the child in a temporary shelter while we investigate. Sophia felt her heart tighten. I cannot let you take her away from me right now. Please look at her. She is terrified. Tamsin glanced back at Arabella on the bed. I need to run a background check on you, Sophia. If everything is clean, I can arrange for you to foster her temporarily while we investigate, but only temporarily. Sophia nodded quickly. I understand. Thank you. Tamsin went back toward the bed to say goodbye, but the moment she mentioned that someone might come to take her later, Arabella panicked. She scrambled off the bed and clung to Sophia's leg, choking sobs breaking out. No, no, she cried. Do not take me. I want to stay with Sophia. Do not leave me. Sophia dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Arabella, trying to soothe her. Tamsin watched the scene, and something in her sharp gaze softened. All right, she said. For now, she can stay here. But I will be back soon. She stepped out the door, but before she left, she paused and looked at Sophia again with a grave expression. That birthmark, she said slowly. A crescent behind the right ear. I have seen it in a missing person file from 5 years ago. A very high-profile file. Sophia felt her blood go cold. What do you mean? Tamsin looked at the little girl curled in Sophia's arms. I need to confirm it. But if I am right, this child is not a normal abandoned kid. Someone of immense ancient power has been searching for her for 5 years. Someone who does not belong to the world of men. The conference room on the top floor of the Blackwood estate was silent as a tomb bathed in the eternal twilight that the master of the house preferred. But Lucian Blackwood, the Vampire King, was not there. He was not in the lavish office, with million-dollar paintings and a massive oak desk carved from wood that had seen the birth of nations. He was in the small room at the end of the hallway on the second floor, a room that had been sealed for half a decade. The room was painted a soft powder pink, with white clouds painted across the ceiling. A princess bed, with a white canopy, stood in the corner, its silk sheets pristine. A bookshelf overflowing with picture books and toys sat under a thin layer of dust. Everything had been left exactly as it was 5 years ago, as if the owner of the room had only stepped out for a moment and could return at any second. Lucien sat in the armchair by the window, where he used to sit, and read bedtime stories to his daughter every night. In his hand was a photograph worn soft from being touched too many times. In the picture was a 6-month-old baby, with black curls and bright shining brown eyes that seemed to hold a spark of the eternal. Arabella, his daughter, his only heir, the child who had been ripped from his arms on a night he would never forget. Memory surged over him like a tidal wave of cold iron. He remembered that night with terrifying clarity. He had been in a meeting with the elders of the Eternal Court when his ancient instincts flared. His loyal caretaker Grace had called her voice panicked beyond sense. He had traveled home with the speed of a shadow. When he burst into the nursery, the crib was empty. Grace lay unconscious on the floor, and his daughter was gone, taken by a thief who knew how to hide from the king's senses. 5 years, 1,825 days, 43,800 hours. He had counted every second. He had turned the entire world inside out. He had spent fortunes on investigators, used his supernatural influence on every continent, and all of it had been meaningless. A knock at the door pulled him from the current of his dark thoughts. Dominic stepped inside, his younger brother and most trusted general. Dominic had the same black hair and silver-gray eyes of the Blackwood line, but his face held fewer hard angles. "Brother," Dominic said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. "The lead in Detroit. It was another fabrication." Lucien did not react. He simply sat there, staring at the photograph. "How many is that now?" he asked, his voice a dull, low rumble that seemed to vibrate the floorboards. Dominic was silent for a moment. 523. 523 times someone had called to say they had seen the lost princess. 523 times Lucien had allowed his cold heart to beat with hope. And 523 times that hope had been crushed into dust. The crystal glass on the table beside him shattered before Dominic realized his brother had even moved. Glass exploded into sparkling shards. Lucien stood there, his hand uninjured. His skin was far tougher than glass, but his eyes burned with a silver fire. He turned back to the window, staring out at the Charleston garden buried under white snow. Another memory crashed down Catalina, his wife. She had died 2 years ago, her human heart finally failing from the grief of their lost child. He had tried to give her his blood to make her immortal, so she could wait with him, but she had refused. She said she could not live forever in a world where her daughter was missing. Their last conversation had been a fight about hope. He had become cynical, while she had insisted Arabella was still out there. Then she was gone, and he never got the chance to tell her she was right. Her last words to him were a whisper, "Find her, Lucien. Bring our star home." Those words were the curse he would carry until the end of time. The vibration of a phone shattered the heavy silence. Lucien looked at the screen, an unknown number. He almost did not answer, thinking it was another vulture trying to feed off his grief. But something in the air changed, a shift in the static of the world. He picked up. "Mr. Blackwood," a woman's voice came through. "This is Detective Tamsin with the Charleston Police Department." Lucien said nothing. He had heard too many calls from the law. "I know you have no reason to believe me," Tamsin continued, But I need you to come to the station right now. We may have found the girl with the crescent seal." Lucien did not remember how he arrived. He only remembered the roar of the wind as he moved through the city like a streak of lightning, leaving the world behind. The black sedan tore through the Charleston streets like a silent bullet, leaving behind the blur of city lights and the confused honks of mortal drivers. Lucien gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned under his strength, his silver-gray eyes glued to the road ahead. In his head, there was only one thought repeating like a mantra: Arabella. His daughter might finally be within reach. Dominic sat beside him, his hand gripping the door handle, watching his brother with a mix of awe and concern. "Brother," Dominic said, his voice tense, "you must maintain control. If you descend upon the police station like a vengeful god, you will only complicate matters. We must be careful." Lucien did not answer. He knew Dominic was right, but the blood of the king was surging in his veins. 5 years of hellish silence were suddenly being replaced by a possibility so bright it was blinding. Catalina's face flashed in his mind. He remembered the day they first met. She was a human who didn't fear the shadows, a woman who looked into his ancient eyes and saw a man instead of a monster. She had been his anchor to the world of light. When Arabella was born, she had been a miracle, a child of both worlds carrying the crescent mark of the Blackwood royalty. 6 short months of being a father. Then the world was stolen. The car skidded to a silent, perfect stop outside the precinct. Lucien was out before the engine had even died, moving down the hallways with long, predatory strides. Everyone he passed seemed to shrink back, an instinctive human reaction to the presence of an apex predator, though they did not know why they were afraid. Detective Tamsin was waiting at the end of the hall. She brought him into a small private room and explained the situation. A child had been found in an alley. A crescent-shaped mark behind the right ear. The right place, the right shape, the right age. But they needed a DNA test to confirm the biological bond. Lucien nodded, his expression unreadable, though his heart was a storm. A medical technician came to draw his blood, and Lucien had to focus intensely to soften his skin enough for the needle to penetrate. Then the waiting began. Tamsin said the results would come back in a few hours because they were using a rapid system for high-priority cases. A few hours. To an immortal who had lived centuries, it should have been nothing, but to a father, it felt like an eternity. Lucien rose, unable to sit. He paced the small room, his movement so fluid, it was almost ghostly. Every sound in the hallway made him snap his head around. He tried to suppress the hope. He had been disappointed 523 times. He was not sure he could survive the 524th. The door opened. Tamsin stepped in, a stack of papers in her hand. Her face was professional and guarded, but her eyes held a spark of something like triumph. Lucien stopped pacing. He turned to face her, his entire body poised like a bowstring drawn to its limit. He was the king of the eternal court. He had commanded legions and faced the passage of eras without flinching. But now he was a man on the edge of a precipice. Tamsin looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke. "It is a positive match, Mr. Blackwood. The child is Arabella Blackwood. Your daughter is alive." Lucien did not collapse. He simply stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to freeze. A sound finally tore out of his throat, a low guttural moan of relief that shook the windows in their frames. It was not the cry of a king. It was the cry of a father who had been wandering in a desert and finally found the sea. Dominic rushed to him, grabbing his shoulders, his own eyes wet with tears. Arabella was alive. After 5 years of shadow, the sun had finally risen. Tamsin led Lucian to another room at the end of the hallway, a room used for delicate cases involving children. But Lucian saw nothing except the little girl sitting on the blue sofa. His heart skipped a beat. Arabella, his star, the child he had searched for through every dark corner of the earth, was sitting right in front of him. But she was no longer the 6-month-old baby of his memories. She had grown. She was 5 years old. 5 years of her life he had missed. 5 years he had not been there to protect her. She was sitting in the lap of a young woman, her small arms wrapped around the woman's neck. A torn, stuffed rabbit was wedged between them. Her curls were messy but clean, and her brown eyes, Catalina's eyes, were watching him with guarded, absolute fear. Lucian took one step forward, and the little girl immediately shrank back into the woman's embrace. She hid behind the young woman, showing only half her small face, staring at him as if he were the darkness itself, come to take her back. Lucian stopped abruptly, the rejection hitting him harder than any physical blow. His daughter was afraid of him. The young woman looked at him with an expression that was both wary and fiercely protective. She had chestnut-brown hair and green eyes that held a depth of compassion he hadn't seen in a long time. Tamsin had told him about her Sophia Bennett, the waitress who had found Arabella in a cardboard box and taken her home. She had saved his daughter's life when he could not. Lucian moved closer, slowly, his movements deliberate and soft. He did not want to trigger her flight instinct. When he was a few steps from the sofa, he dropped to his knees. It was the first time in centuries he had knelt before anyone. He was the king, the one the hidden world bowed to, but here he was, only a father, begging for a crumb of recognition. "Arabella," he said, his voice rough and low, stripped of its royal authority. "Do you know you have a mark behind your right ear, a crescent moon?" The little girl did not answer, but her eyes blinked a flicker of something ancient in her gaze. Lucian kept going, his voice trembling with a weight of emotion. "Your mother said it was a gift from the stars. Your full name is Arabella Catalina Blackwood. Your mother named you after the moon and the stars, because you were our light." The girl still hid behind Sophia, but she was no longer shrinking. Her brown eyes watched him with a curiosity that began to outweigh the terror. "I have been looking for you for 5 years. Lucian went on, tears that were rare for his kind spilling down his face. "I never stopped searching. Not one single night. I love you, Arabella. More than the sun loves the dawn." The little girl looked at Sophia, searching for a sign. Sophia looked down at the child, and then up at the man on his knees. She saw the king's silver eyes and realized he was not entirely human, but she also saw the raw, bleeding heart of a father. She nodded to Arabella. "It is true, sweetheart," Sophia said softly. "He is your father. He has been looking for you for a very, very long time. You can trust him." Arabella looked at Sophia, then back at Lucian. Slowly, with great hesitation, she loosened her grip on Sophia's neck. She stayed in the woman's lap, but she looked straight into Lucian's eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. Lucian let out a choked sob. "That is right, my star," he said. "Daddy is here. I am finally here." It was not a cinematic reunion. It was a fragile beginning. When Lucian eventually offered to take her home, Arabella panicked again, clinging to Sophia with a desperate strength. She would not let go. She cried out a sound that tore through Lucian's chest. He stood there helpless, realizing he was a stranger to his own flesh. Sophia looked at the pain on Lucian's face, and then at the terror in the girl's. Maybe I should go with you, Sophia suggested, just until she feels safe in the new house. Lucian looked at her, his silver eyes wide with gratitude. Please, he whispered. The black limousine carried them to the outskirts of Charleston to the Blackwood estate. When they arrived, Sophia gasped. It was a Gothic palace of stone and ivy hidden behind massive iron gates. Inside the house was a labyrinth of luxury and ancient secrets. Grace the housekeeper hurried out weeping at the sight of the girl, but Arabella would not let go of Sophia. They brought her to the pink room, but the girl found it too big and too strange. She sat in the corner with Sophia clutching her stuffed rabbit. Lucian stood in the hallway watching through the door. He saw Sophia singing a lullaby, the same one Catalina used to sing, and he realized Sophia was the bridge he needed. He realized his daughter wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of men in general. He thought of the bruises and the man in the leather jacket Arabella had mentioned. A cold, dark fury settled in his soul. Whoever had hurt his daughter would face the wrath of a king, but for now he had to learn how to be a father again. He watched as Sophia lulled the child to sleep, and he knew he owed this human woman a debt he could never fully repay. In the weeks that followed, the Blackwood estate transformed from a cold, silent mausoleum into a place of slow, tentative healing. Sophia had become an anchor for the household. She stayed in the room next to Arabella's, acting as the translator for a father and daughter who spoke different languages of the heart. Lucian followed Sophia's advice with a humility that shocked his brother Dominic. He did not force his presence. He began by sitting in the hallway with the door ajar, reading ancient legends and soft poems in a low melodic voice. He let Arabella get used to the sound of him, the scent of him, the reality of him. One evening Sophia found a hidden hoard of food under Arabella's pillow, dry crackers and half-eaten fruit. She showed Lucian, and the king of the night wept silently, realizing the depths of the trauma his child had endured. They did not take the food away. They simply made sure it was always fresh, providing a sense of security the child had never known. As the days turned into months, Sophia and Lucian found themselves drawn together by their shared devotion to the girl. One night, while they sat on the grand balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, Sophia's shawl slipped, revealing a jagged scar on her shoulder. Lucian's preternatural senses caught it instantly. "Who did that to you?" he asked, his voice dropping into a register of ancient power. Sophia told him about her ex-husband, about the years of shadows she had escaped. Lucian listened, his silver eyes darkening to the color of a stormy sea. He did not tell her then, but he sent Dominic to find the man. Not to kill him, for Sophia had asked for no more violence, but to ensure the man would never again walk the earth with a peaceful mind, haunted by shadows he could not explain. Between Lucian and Sophia, a quiet, profound romance began to bloom, a connection between the eternal and the mortal. Lucian found himself fascinated by Sophia's resilience, her ability to love a child that was not hers with a ferocity that rivaled his own. And Sophia saw the man behind the crown, the lonely soul who had waited 5 years in the dark for a single spark of light. The turning point came when the man who had kidnapped Arabella, a former servant named Vincent, who had sought revenge against the Blackwood line, was finally captured by the police. When Lucian heard the news, he wanted to descend upon the jail and tear the man apart. But Sophia stopped him. She took his hands in hers, his cold, powerful hands, and looked into his eyes. "If you do that, you become the monster he told her you were," she said. "Show her you are the king of justice, not the king of vengeance." Lucian stayed his hand. He went to the station and faced Vincent behind glass, and the sight of his daughter's tormentor almost broke his resolve. But he remembered Sophia's words. He let the law take its course, ensuring Vincent would spend the rest of his mortal life in a cage. When he returned home, Arabella was waiting for him at the top of the stairs. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked down slowly and tucked her small hand into his. "Daddy," she said, "did the bad man go away?" Lucian picked her up, marveling at how she no longer felt weightless. "Yes, my star. He is gone forever." That night they sat together as a family for the first time. The vampire king, the human waitress, and the princess of two worlds. The story of Sophia Lucian and Arabella teaches us that the truest power in this world and any other is not the strength of one's arm or the length of one's life, but the courage to remain soft in a world that is often hard. It reminds us that we are not defined by the shadows that have fallen upon us, but by the light we choose to create for others. Healing is not a straight path. It is a slow, winding journey, taken one step at a time, often requiring a bridge built by the kindness of a stranger. Love in its purest form is the ultimate protection. It can cross the boundaries of life and death, of species and status, to find its way home. We must never underestimate the impact of a single act of compassion, like opening a back door on a freezing night, for it can set in motion a series of events that saves not just a life, but an entire legacy. For those who have lived long lives and seen much sorrow, let this be a reminder that it is never too late for a new beginning. Even the coldest winter eventually yields to the spring, and even the most broken heart can find a way to beat with joy once more, provided it finds a reason to hope. May we all be brave enough to find the children in the boxes of the world, and strong enough to lead them back to the stars.